Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Hybrid Friends. Today with a good friend, a new guy in the spotlight, Christian from Devo team. And before we introduce the topic, Christian, maybe you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Flo. My name is Christian Sminido. I'm lead consultant at Devo team. I'm working in IT for over 10 years now, on actually with more than 5 years in Azure focus. The last 2 years I use especially to working with Azure Local and
For everyone who didn't notice the renaming, it's Azure Stack HCI. Now we call it Azure Local. There will be another video on the channel where I describe the why, but that we will just say Azure Local from now.
yes. Let's say I was in Azure Stack HCI Science 21H2. I'm original from Spain. I'm living in Germany since 12 years now. And at the beginning, it was a difficult culture, a challenge to adapt, but now I build my family here and really enjoy the culture.
Yeah, sounds good. So, for our topic today, we will talk about Azure Stack Local / HCI day two operations. And you wrote an amazing article, which I will also link in the description below, on the important things on day two, what you should do, how you should operate. And then you will also tell us some of your, I think, real world issues you had during the day two deployment and then operational stuff. So
Yeah.
stage is yours.
The mainly origin from that article was after the installation from Azure Stack HCI, you need to make some operations for the workload deployments. And there are not as well documented as you may think. There is everything documented on Microsoft Learn article, but not staging at this form that you can go and say, all right, I will configure the network at this part, I will configure the monitoring on this part. And for that purpose, I was writing the blog article.
So basically you put some structure in the Microsoft unstructured documentation
Yes,
and made it readable for everyone outside of Microsoft product groups.
of course, that's the point. Yeah, I was facing some issues at the beginning, like if you are trying to creating a logical network, round about 2 months ago was needed to connect to the cluster or to get the network adapter name from that, and you make it with PowerShell. At the moment, it's a very well done process. You can go it and select it by drag and drop on the portal. It's easily covered, but at the beginning from the article, it wasn't so. That's
So
why I'm updating the article for that purpose. And after the rebranding from Azure Stack HCI in the portal, I will update these areas too.
sounds good. So do you want to share something? Do you want to share your article and we will, let's say, take it as some guideline, or do you want to
Yeah,
share, or do you have a demo prepared, something like that?
I can share my article for that purpose. Let's take screen sharing. All right. The
Oh,
mainly structure from the article. Are you able to see it?
yeah, it's there.
The mainly structure from the article is based on, first of all, what is in the infrastructure deployed for that purpose. It means how works Azure Stack HCI and how it's possible to manage all of this stuff from the portal. It's all related over the Azure Arc resource bridge. I call it the the magic black box for for Azure Stack HCI. It's a VM with AKS or Kubernetes cluster on there, which is taking the wall operations. When you are putting the API request to the portal, it goes down to the resource bridge, and this operation will be done on the cluster over the resource bridge.
What we should say here is since 23H2, the resource bridge is part of the operating system. So in the past with 22H2, you were able to, let's say, opt out the resource bridge and say, I don't need it. With 23H2 and now with Azure Local, rename it 24, I think 11 will be the next version to release. It's always in and it's always required, like the Arc connectivity. So don't think it runs out. You can still deploy your workloads like virtual machines using Hyper-V Manager, etc. But Resource Bridge is no longer an option as service. And as you already said, it's running. It's Kubernetes, so you will run the Kubernetes always on the nodes.
At this point, I want to say you shouldn't deploy the VMs actually over Hyper-V Manager, because if you do it so, it's possible and it works. If you do it so, you have the problem that you may have VM virtual machines that are not possible to manage in Azure directly.
Yeah, so that's maybe one thing we can also lift some confusion is. Both are Arc managed, so you can also redeploy or deploy the Arc agent afterwards into an Hyper-V VM, how we call it within Microsoft. But it's not then, you cannot shut it down, you cannot reboot it, you cannot change configuration within the VM. That's only possible if it's a resource bridge connected Arc VM, let's say it this way, or resource bridge deployed VM, because the Arc agent within that VM and also on the hypervisor is a bit special. It uses the attestation service. It uses a lot of background connectivities.
It allows you to manage the VM from host perspective. It means you can change the amount of vCPUs on there, the amount of RAM at the moment, and make a cold reboot from the VM. That's not possible if the VM is only Arc enabled.
But both options are still there, and they're both still supported. And at some point, I have customers who cannot use the resource bridge for security reasons, firewall reasons, because it's using a public endpoint. So those often fall back to Hyper-V VMs and Hyper-V management.
Yep. There is other main scenario from that point. If you are trying to restore VMs on a new cluster, it will be not possible at the moment to do it over the portal with the Azure Arc resource bridge. You only can do it at host level. It means like making a new VM with a Hyper-V manager.
Yep.
And for that kind of scenario, you have the problem that if you want to show this VM at the portal, it's a process called iteration. I know the product group is working on there from here. And Kenny does Kenny Love does a really good blog post on there in which he's migrating VMs with Azure Migrate from host level to the cluster level with Azure Migrate, and in this process is able to register this VM on the Arc resource bridge.
Yeah, and we can again give a bit background there, because that specific part of Azure Migrate is driven by the VMware customers who migrate to Azure Local. So they need to have this hydration process. They need to enable resource bridge. And if it works on VMware, if it works on a physical server, why shouldn't it work on on Azure Stack HCI or Azure Local? And Hyper-V to dehydrate the VMs. That's also one thing. I think we will put Kenny's series in the description, but yeah, I really like that concept of dehydration. And
Yeah.
as you said, already said, that's something the product group is working on at the moment as part of Azure Migrate. But if there are enough people asking for it, and I know there are enough, it could become a standalone tool at some point.
Okay, let's go forward. The next point after a deployment from Azure Stack HCI is the features that are on the cluster. After you deploy a vanilla Azure Stack HCI with a cloud deployment, you see a lot of red cross. You are not able to deploy a VM, you are not able to deploy virtual desktop or Kubernetes, you don't have monitoring configured at this point. And for that scenario, I write a guidance, how you make at the first the logical network. And with this logical network, we are able to deploy VMs. What is this logical network? This logical network is a pointer, I will say, in Azure, which is holding the network from the HCI, from the switch, which is in the HCI in Azure Local deployed. It means you are able with one switch to deploy as many logical network as you want. You are able on the logical network part to, at the moment, since 1 month, you are able to select the switch name over drag and drop. At the past, you needed to get on the HCI and grab the switch name, which is using for the external communication, and you are able to make pools. It's a different concept from network, as you may know. I was expecting at this point that you are able to drop the whole network, and it's fine so, but these pools are needed for a process in the next steps. In when you deploy a VM, you are able to deploy it with the DHCP configuration or with static, but this static configuration doesn't mean that you need to put the IP address from the server. The IP address will be assigned from this pool automatically. You can edit this IP address and you can go on one pool from this address too, but if you don't take a configuration at this point, it will assign automatically the first IP address on the pool, and the configuration is static. It's a little bit awkward at this moment to understand it, but
it's maybe if you choose for DHCP, it's acting or the vSwitch is acting as a DHCP relay.
Yeah.
Then to your DHCP server, firewall, whoever hands out those IP addresses, and you would need to do the reservations yourself or go into the virtual machine and change the IP address locally. And if I understand it correctly, if you choose for static, you have a pre-assigned pool or pre-reserved pool for your virtual machine deployments.
You need to select it.
Yeah. And during the deployment process, it will be checked like what IP do I have available for my VMs on the host, and then start to deploy directly on the host or directly assign it to the virtual machines. It's a bit, let's say for an enterprise scenario, it may work because you could assign the IP address to the whole cluster. When I look into hosted scenarios, where you need to be pretty flexible with your IPs, it's maybe not the best option to go for static. There's maybe you want to do DHCP and have your DHCP server for every client, for every customer, and just work with reservations or change the IP address locally later on using PowerShell, remote PowerShell, whatsoever.
Yeah, because if you are using the DHCP for that purpose, you are able to handling the whole IP assignment centrally. If you are using at this point static network configuration from the logical network, you need to modify every logical network from the portal. At the moment, you are not able to modify, deploy it.
Maybe put it in. Let us put it into scenarios. DHCP, I would go for a data center purpose and large deployments where I have different multiple clusters in, let's say, in a location in an IP scope where I will not have only one or single cluster, one or two clusters within one of my networks. Static is maybe good for the edge. I'm a retailer. I have a small IP address range assigned to my stores and to every cluster I have there. So I can put it directly on the cluster. There will be only one or two clusters, so it's easy to manage. And then I can use the static pools, and I don't need to have these central operations. I can just use my Excel sheet and say store 2 is 19.50 to 19.99 whatsoever, and so on and so on. And there you maybe want to use the static option to have small chunks for your stores where you only have one or two clusters, only a few virtual machines, and where you don't actually force overlaps, which you would then have in those larger deployments. Make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense a lot. After we are able to deploy the network configuration for the logical network, we see with this configuration, we have the first prerequisite solved for the deployment from Kubernetes clusters. Kubernetes cluster deployment is easy. I will handle this on later blog post, but the main prerequisite you need for Kubernetes cluster is the network. And after the network, the image deployment is doing over the Azure Arc Resource Bridge, getting the versions from Azure Public. And you see, you don't have the possibility to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop or Azure Auto Manage for Windows Server. Why it's happening? That's happened because for that purpose, you need to deploy a VM image. We go after to this point. But first, I want to talk a little bit about Windows Admin Center. If you were working with Windows Admin Center at the past, it was not a main requisite, but it was used often, usually for the deployment from 22 through Azure Stack HCI and for extensions from the OEMs. If you want to try to update firmware on the hardware from the cluster, at latest versions, older versions, you need to have Windows Admin Center, mainly with the extension for that purpose. Yes.
Yeah, and so for example, Dell Open Manage, if you wanted to have an integrated update for your firmware for your drivers from Dell, in this case, you need to have the Open Manage extension. The Open Manage extensions were not able to be deployed within Azure. Same for HPE or Lenovo TrueView and so on. And you needed to have Admin Center for those purposes. With the switch to SBE packages, which I covered with the Aromia on the channel, that's no longer required. So you can update using the Windows update for getting drivers, etc., starting 23H2, 24 dot whatsoever. All of those drivers then come through Windows updates, or you can use the SUU from the vendor if you have older systems like HPE G10. With that, or with no longer needing those extensions, the main purpose of admin center is more or less gone.
I will say yes, you're right. You can handle a bunch of operations from the portal, but if you want or if you need to manage VMs which are not hydrated on the cluster, there is an option to go for Windows Admin Center from Azure portal.
Yeah,
if you don't have local access to the cluster.
That's true.
That's actually my mainly scenario in which I can think it works. But as I say, local Windows Admin Center, I don't need it, because if I'm able to connect locally to the VM, I'm able to handle the cluster and the whole operation with PowerShell. It's quickly effective, and there is a lot of documentations. All the problems, what are you expecting with updates, and all the troubleshooting on there is doing or solved via PowerShell directly on the cluster nodes. But if you need to manage not hydrated VMs, it will be a possibility to use Azure Arc based Windows Admin Center.
Yeah.
It has a big, I will say, future. You don't need to have a user which is located on the domain from the cluster, I mean Windows domain, or a user which is having the credentials from the LCM user or the lifecycle management user, which is used to deploy Azure Stack HCI. You can handle the whole rights over Entra ID. It means over resource space RBAC, you are able to connect to the cluster on the Windows Admin Center. The whole activation process is well documented at this point too. A biggest future too is you don't need to open ports in internet. It means it works like a reverse connection. They only need to reach Azure, and you connect to Azure, and over this point are you able to handle the cluster Windows Admin Center. You don't need to make firewall rules for their open public IPs at the internet.
Yeah, one thing you still need to open is it's requesting specific URLs. And if you're an enterprise and you want to restrict, be really restrictive on the URLs used by your servers, then you need to open those URLs. So there will be still some firewall rules, but if you're on a retail again, and there's more or less open internet, that's not the biggest issue. On the other side, if you're an enterprise, if you're a bit more restrictive with the firewall rules, you will then put those URL exceptions in place. Or if you have a next generation firewall, or no, you can call it current gen firewall, which operates on services, those URLs, those exceptions would then be integrated into the Microsoft Cloud service from a Palo Alto, Checkpoint, Barracuda, Fortinet, etc., etc. So those
I can say you something. If you were able to deploy the cluster, you already solved this problem.
Because it's needed.
It's mandatory. You have on the documentation from Microsoft for deployment, network deployment requisites, the firewall URL list for the whole services, AKS and this kind of stuff. At this point, there is some room for improvement. There are a lot of wildcards on the URL list that are difficult to point at enterprise customers.
There is already some improvement with the Arc gateway, But
Yeah.
yeah, as I said, there's a lot more where we could where it could be done better and could be simplified. But as there's a bunch of service, partly behind front door, partly directly accessed, there is a lot of optimization work to do for the team. That's I'm totally with you. So our gateway solves a bit,
Yeah.
but not everything.
I'm playing around with our gateway too. It
Right.
will be interesting to get it GA.
Yeah, it's public preview since this week.
Yeah.
So everyone can try it now.
Yeah.
Before that, it was a bit of a process to play with it, but
Okay. After
from
the
a
installation for the future is like a, I will call it plugin. The extension will be installed, but at the moment I was facing some kind of errors by my configuration with 24.08 version, and it wasn't able to install. I was not the only guy which was facing this problem. Maybe with the new version, this is the problem solved. You need to assign the role to add a role assignment for Windows Admin Center, administrator login, and the user which is able to connect the cluster with this role assignment is able to manage the Windows Admin Center from the cluster.
Another thing we can mention here is the operational model which is behind, or the thought process behind using an Entra ID user to log into a local system is just enough and just-in-time administration. So in your scenario, you don't want to have a permanent access for users, partners,
Yes.
admins on the host infrastructure itself. You only want to have the permission to connect if it's required. Let's say you're working with a customer on Azure Local. You need to solve an issue. You need to deploy your product. You need to take some service on the host, and you will then ask for access. Let's say to do those operations, they will grant you the access for 30 minutes, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
And that's
It's a very straightforward process, and it's really nice because you can enable to access the cluster for a bunch period of time without going a large process, VPN, adding this user to some kind of Active Directory, and you can make a cloud-only user for that purpose, onboard this user, make sure that this user needs MFA for login to Azure. And it's a really nice process. And I will say there is justification for using Windows Admin Center on HCI if you need to restart the Azure Arc Resource Bridge VM and you are not able to connect it to the cluster directly. That's the option for that purpose.
And it's a similar management approach like Microsoft uses in Azure. There's never access to the infrastructure except there's a service restart, or there is something the service cannot do itself for healing. Then you can request access for the infrastructure, but that request then runs through different approvers changed, like your manager, director, data center operators, security, blah, 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 blah. And all of those get notified and need to put their approval in place. And if someone says, okay, Christian is an untrusted guy, he always broke a lot of things, reject.
Reject, and
you will not get access, which is really a great process, especially when you're remote, when you're not in your data center, when you're not at your site and you still want to have control. You can also give those access, let's say, to a Dell technician who is on site, who needs to do maintenance, replace a host or something. you can just give them access for the operations. Say, okay, log into your take your notebook, log on portal.azure.com. Here's your user account. I've sent the password on a different way, so log in, do your work, and then you're done, and you're gone afterwards. So it's a really nice operational model.
All right, let's go with the next main point: monitoring and alerting. That was red cross too at the beginning from the slides. How you monitor Azure Local. There is an Azure product. The best way to do it is with insights. It means integrating it on Azure monitoring. The configuration is straightforward. You go and create a data collection rule on the same subscription, which you don't need to have it on the same subscription which the cluster is located, but I collect everything in the same subscription, same resource group. For my purpose, I'm building the cluster every 2 weeks and wiping it and searching for, I will say, not problems, but to get this process clean, I deploy it every 2 weeks. After when you create a data collection rule, you need to make the endpoint for that purpose. You need to select to create a local analytic workspace. After this whole process, you have to wait 50 minutes, and after that you are synchronizing some performance counters and Windows events. I used to add more Windows event for getting some virtual machine insights. It means at the moment Azure Local, sorry, brings a lot of reporting on the default workbook, but you don't are able to see which VM are actually not working. You see a big circle in which says 3 VMs are running, one is failing, but you don't see which VM is failing. And I'm working actually on the workbook, which is able to solve this process. And for that purpose, I'm getting insights from.
Will you upload that workbook also on your GitHub repo or something like that? So that's maybe something we can share, because that's a request we're getting often from customers. Is there an example workbook? And if you have a GitHub repo, I think you will send it over. I will put it in the description, and at some point, people who are interested will see then your workbook you're working on. But that's something, especially in a day 2 operation, many customers, many users of Azure Local are struggling with. There's no example from Microsoft, to be honest.
There is one, but I think there is not good enough. Because I remember it was around about 2 months. It took 6 months to get RDMA working on this workbook. I was deploying cluster with cloud deployment, and everything was fine, but the workbook says no RDMA traffic. And there's room for improvement. I will put all the workbooks and all the script that I'm using on my GitHub. I make a specific repository for that purpose. It's called HCI. You will see at the bottom, I will talk about image building for that purpose. That's why we will put it on the links. Then let's go for alerts. I doesn't change much on the alert side. You can create alerts easy from the Microsoft documentation. You can go for default alerts, and you will see, say, CPU usage. If it goes over 80%, it will get some alerts on. You can go for SMS or email alerting. My main, I will not say problem, but improvement at this point is that this alerting is not real-time alerts. It means if a cluster fails, it took a little bit to get this alert form. It's not real-time like second base alerting, but it works. For the mainly purpose, it works. The cluster is a redundant system. If some cluster nodes fails, you will get the alert from there, and the others all cover the whole workloads. Other point which was interesting to talk was Windows Defender application control. Windows Defender application control, I don't know, Flo, if you talk about on your podcast from BETAC.
No.
That's signing process or it allows you to use applications on the cluster side. It needs to be signed. It needs to be some rules on there for that purpose. If you enable Windows Defender application control, you can not install applications without XML, which is allowing you to do it. The mainly providers for backup has his own XML for that purpose. I need to disable it because in my series I'm trying to use disaster recovery, and at the moment, because it is in preview, the disaster recovery agent, when it's installing, it's getting an error because it's not, I would say, properly synced for that purpose.
So I think we can summarize that there are applications you want to run in your cluster. So as everyone knows, Azure Local just uses the same Windows failover cluster management like Windows Server. There you can also run directly applications from the cluster as a clustered service like SQL, as an example. We have partners, like you already mentioned, backup providers, monitoring partners, who create applications specifically running in the cluster, or Azure Site Recovery Agent, Azure Replica Agent, Hyper-V Replica Agent. They are all running as an application within the cluster. You want to run those in the cluster because you don't want to run on a VM on the host, basically, because that VM can fail. The host can fail, it cannot migrate, you could lose some data, so you want to run the application directly in the cluster. And if you want to run an application in the cluster, it needs to fulfill some kind of standards to not compromise the cluster, to run in a monitored and functional fashion. So if you're pointing here to V, who's a really amazing partner doing that. So if you want to run that, the partner needs to support, and going for Windows Defender Windows Defender authorized cluster application control. It's really the thing which needs to be supported.
Yep.
For previous services, yes, you need to disable it, but you shouldn't run previous services on your production cluster.
Yeah.
So that's then out of the question that you can enforce or audit or whatsoever. But it should run if you want to run applications.
Microsoft covers the the policy to enable third-party software at this point. That's why I'm saying you need a policy, XML policy with some kind of hash. And after this deployment, you are able to deploy the application. You are fully right. For production environment, I will say enforce is mandatory. For our POC and test purpose, I let it on audit mode and check it, what can we do with this. But at the moment, you are not able to use disaster recovery agent is in preview without deactivating or getting this in audit. That was for around about 2 weeks. Maybe it changed. When it changed, I will change the blog article too. BitLocker, good theme. When you are deploying the cluster, you are able to select which drives will be encrypted.
And that's really one thing. The operating system, if you want to run secure core on the OS, it will always be enabled. So there will be no change to that. But I really like the point here you make with the CSVs.
Yes. That's because I'm running my cluster on my laptop, in which I'm working. I don't have such amount of storage for the whole cluster and workloads, and you need to disks for the cluster deployment as CSV for the cluster shell volume. And in my case, there is a 1 terabyte disk as CSV for data, but it isn't used. It means it expands with the usage. If I'm putting some data on there in a CSV, it expands on my cluster. I can show, maybe let's take a look if I'm able to. Yeah, I'm open my cluster. I will show in the screen right now. Okay. I'm putting the whole cluster on C HCI. I will change the name too for this. And I have 3 disks for the cluster. One is the C disk and 2 S2D disk for the cluster purpose. And this disk is the data disk. It means there are the CSV for the infrastructure, which is just like which is a local needs, and the CSV for the user data. If I'm going to BitLocker this disk, it will take the whole storage, and it will put my my little laptop to cry. That's why I'm using only unencrypted BitLocker volumes, but you are able to enable or disable this.
In a production environment, you definitely should enable BitLocker, because it also prevents someone from stealing the data, from removing this, especially if you're running mirrored for some reason, so that no one can pose your disk or so. So in a test environment, yes, feel free. But on a production environment, always enable BitLocker, and always enable it, because you also mentioned it here, before you put the first workloads on your server, because if you do it afterwards, as you stated here, it will disrupt your workloads. And depending on the amount of storage you have, on the compute you have to do the initial encryption, it would take several minutes or maybe an hour, which ends up in an outage, basically.
Yeah, I I put it on there because I was experiencing such a problem in the past. Plan accordingly over the weekend if you want to enable BitLogger and if you have a bunch of amount of data on there. But it works fine. In every article I'm writing, I put some deep insights from the people which are making this possible for me to understand and to deploy and write my script. Jeremy has a very good article in his Del Geos.
So it's basically most people from this channel will know it under name MS Lab.
Yes.
So that's how Jeremy is calling it. He's still calling it MS Lab. But yeah, it's now moved under the Dell Geos repo, and then he's continuing this work there. And we have fans of Jeremy here.
I'm a fan from Jeremy too. Okay, let's move to then. I think that's the last point. VM image. You are able to deploy VM image over the marketplace. At the moment, in the marketplace, there are not as many image you can think. There are not the whole image selection that you have on Azure. But I was able with my script and based it on Jeremy approach for his lab, was able to write a custom script which you can select the image you want to download from Azure Public, grab it down to the cluster, improve because the Azure Public image are VHD, improve it to VHDX to reduce the amount of storage you needed for there, and use it with the local file share path. It means you download the image to the cluster over PowerShell at the moment, and you can put it on your image. I would say Azure Local Image Gallery. If I'm able to go for there, let's take a look. The whole repository is linked on the article too. You see the script for the different workloads. We have the lab script for the deployment. You need only 3 scripts for the whole Azure Stack HCI deployment or Azure local deployment. And in day 2, we have a start-stop Azure Stack HCI script because my lab is nested. It means I have one domain controller and the node, which is getting the whole cluster resource. And if I need to shut down or put them on, you need to go it in a specific way. It means first take the cluster role off, shut the node down, and then you can go for DC shutdown. And for start, you need to go the same way but backwards. Start the DC and then the node and put the role up and running.
Okay. From a day 2 operation perspective, so that's what you would do on a day 2. You also mentioned things like backup. Is there would you do the backup on the day 2, or would you just now let's say, go for fault testing, etc.?
I wanted to plan backup in day two. Day two is for me backup too. You are right. But because the kind of the topic, I want to make a specific log entry for backup, disaster recovery, and I will say redundancy at this point, in which I cover the whole process.
Okay.
Because you have some kind of day two operations like updates too, which I'm not covering at this point. That's not a really day two. Day two is after the installation, and then you need to make some change. But updates is a process you need to take care of about, and there is not not I would say not good enough for me at the moment, because you face a lot of problems by when you are trying to do updates over the portal. But I'm trying to get some kind of troubleshooting script which put up more information in which step is actually the problem and provide a solution.
Yeah, perfect. So I think we're done for today with day two, and as an amazing article, we will link it in the description. There are a lot of things I think a community will benefit from. And as you already said, there will be more in the future. So for everyone here, just subscribe to the blog, subscribe the LinkedIn account of Christian, and follow him on GitHub and wherever. There will be some more amazing content coming. From my end, really thank you for explaining your day two operations and what you do with your customers here, putting some more guidance out there for Azure Local, formerly Azure Storage HCI,
It's too
and really
hard.
help the community here.
It's too hard to stay on the name. Actually,
Yeah,
for me, make a lot of sense to go for Azure Local, but it's like Entra ID and Azure Active Directory. It took right
we're
about.
working with those names for several years now. It's hard to change. But I
Yeah.
will also do a video on why the name change was necessary from a Microsoft perspective, talking about a bit of my opinion, and but it will be in the next weeks or days on the channel too. But yeah, so any famous last words before you're allowed to leave?
Thank you for hear us. And if you want to provide some kind of feedback, I will thank you. If you want to put a comment on, or if you have some kind of concern, feel free to do it. Connect to me, and I'm open to work with everyone for that purpose.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Christian. And for everyone else, please remember to subscribe to the channel, even if we don't have much content out there yet. There's a lot of new things coming from Bernhard, from myself. And we are still working on that channel. Then, everyone,
Thank
Christian,
you.
thank you so much, and bye.
Bye bye.